Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. Are you a new photographer, or maybe a photographer that doesn't have a lot of experience in Lightroom and you're really confused about all those different sliders and the different tabs and the different modules and you just don't know how to process your images? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how you could quickly and easily process your images in Lightroom. We're going to work on this image. We started out with it looking like this, and we're going to end up with it looking like this. As I mentioned at the top, this video is meant for the new photographer or the photographer that just doesn't have a lot of experience in Lightroom. You're really kind of confused about all the different tabs and all the different modules, and you really just want to make your image look nice quickly. You're probably listening to a lot of the so-called photography teachers on YouTube, like me, that tell you you have to shoot raw, and you come out with a file like this. It's just kind of flat looking, it has no pizzazz, no pop, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, when I shoot JPEG, it looks a lot better than this, but all those so-called experts are telling me that this is a better way to go. Well, it is a better way to go. All you need to do is just know some rudimentary post-processing skills. Now, we have this raw file. It's in Lightroom. I'm in the Develop module. That's where we develop our photos. I'm going to make a little more room. I'm going to go over here in this left panel. See this little triangle? I'm going to click on that to close that panel down. And down here in the film strip, there's a little triangle down there. I'll click on that. Now I have more room and I can see my image better. Now, when you're processing an image, you're really processing three different aspects of the photo: tone, contrast, and color. Now, we'll start with tone. What is tone? Well, you probably most often might have heard someone say, like, oh, that guy has a bright yellow shirt. And if you asked them, what is the tone of his shirt? They would say bright yellow. Well, that's technically not correct. The color of his shirt is yellow, but the tone is bright. Conversely, maybe he has dark blue pants on. And similarly, you would say that his color of his pants are blue, but the tone is dark. So tone has to do with all the different brightness levels of all the different aspects of your image. And you could see in the basic panel of Lightroom, we have a section called tone. And we have 6 sliders. And to tell you the truth, most of it is handled with these 4 sliders. The contrast, I kind of pulled that out. We're going to talk about contrast independently of tone. And then we have exposure. So we have 5 sliders, and these 4 actually, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, handle most of the tone adjustments. So we're going to do tone first, and I recommend you always do tone first. And we have an image here, and it's a raw file, and when you look at it, as I look at it at least, I think this area where the grass is, the bales, and the trees, that's kind of dark. Then up here where the clouds and the sky, it's a little bit bright. So those are highlights and shadows. Well, to me, the shadows look a little bit more like they need a little more work. So that's what I do. I go right to those right away. You don't have to go in order. You could jump around. I'm just going to go, to me, as I look at the image, the shadows need work. So I'm going to go to the shadow slider, and if I move it to the right, I'll make the shadows brighter. And that's called opening up the shadows. Conversely, if the shadows were too bright, I'd move it to the left. Now, in this case, I'm just going to open them up, move it to the right a little bit. Now, highlights are next. I look at those. They're a little bright. I'm just going to bring those down. Now, don't worry about doing this in a robotic way and you have to do it in a precise adjustment. That's not what photography is about. Photography is really, when you're doing this post-processing, it's a kind of art form, and you should process it to your liking and not worry about what someone else might do. All right, so we have shadows opened up, they're brighter, and highlights reined in a little bit. They're a little darker. We'll do a before after. There's before, and there's after. Now already our image is looking better, and we only moved 2 sliders. Now if this image was overall dark or overall bright, I would probably jump to that exposure slider first and move it to the right to brighten it up or left to darken it down. In this case, it wasn't overall bright or overall dark. It was properly exposed. We just had darker shadows and brighter highlights, and I took care of that with 2 sliders. Now what are whites and blacks? I mean, how does that relate to highlights and shadows? Well, the brightest parts of the highlights are whites. The darkest parts of the shadow are blacks. And typically what you like to do for most images is you like to kind of bring in the highlights and open up the shadows, and then you want to do the opposite with whites and blacks. It adds a little bit more tonal depth to your image, and it will make the image pop. So we moved highlights to the left. Whites now, which are the brightest part of highlights, we'll just move that a little bit to the right. And we're going to make the brightest parts of those whites brighter. Similarly for the blacks, which are the darkest parts of the shadows, we're going to move that the opposite way of that slider, which is to the left. So we're making those a little darker. Now let's do a before after. There's before and there's after. Now it's really starting to pop, right? So 4 sliders, we've really done a lot. Now I think tone is taken care of. We need to do something with contrast. Well, conveniently located up here is a contrast slider. I'm just going to add a little contrast, move it to the right. Now there's a before and there's an after. Really starting to look good now, and I've only moved 5 sliders. Now, what have we left out? Well, I talked about color, but as far as like tone and contrast, we've affected the highlights and the shadows, the whites and the blacks. What are we neglecting? Midtones. There's no midtone slider in Lightroom, but down here in Presence, there's a clarity slider, and you'll often hear the so-called photography teachers tell you that clarity is really mid-tone contrast. So we're going to affect the midtones and the contrast all at once with the clarity slider. I'll move it to the right, and you'll see that the image gets a little bit sharper. Look at that. Isn't that something? Really can make it pop with that clarity slider. Now there's before and there's after. I've moved 5 sliders. I've done tone and I've done contrast. Now, there's a texture slider here. Texture's like really fine detail. And in this image, there's not a real lot of fine detail. But if you're doing an image, let's say, of an insect, and it's got like little hairs coming off its legs or off its body, its abdomen or something, you'll notice that when you move that texture slider to the right, it's really going to make those hairs well defined. Similarly, if you're doing flower photography or something like that, it's going to really bring out the texture of the petals. In this case, I'm just going to move it up a little bit. Really not needed much on this image though, but that slider will come in handy on many images. So 6 sliders in, and we started here and we're there. It's already probably better than any JPEG a camera would create. Now, what's left? We had tone, contrast, color. 2 different aspects of color. First is white balance. Most of us, especially when we're first starting out, use an auto white balance setting on our camera, and you'll find that more than half of the time, that is fine. That is fine. You don't have to do anything. But if you want to experiment, feel free. Go up here to this drop down next to WB for white balance and try some of the other adjustments, like go to cloudy. See what that does. You can see it warmed it up. We'll go to shade. It will warm it up even more. We'll go to tungsten. Oh, it's going to cool it way off. Now listen, don't worry about adjusting any of these. Lightroom is a non-destructive processor. That means it never writes to your original RAW file. It stores all these adjustments in its own catalog. So nothing will get damaged. If you want to start over, just click this reset button here and it will bring everything back to where you started. So we're going to go back to as shot. I liked that. I think that looked pretty good. So there, we've moved so far. Now I haven't done the white balance. I didn't need to, but I've moved the contrast slider, the 4 sliders below it, texture and clarity. So I moved 7 sliders, right? There's before, there's after. Another aspect of color is just color saturation. We have 2 sliders that take care of that. vibrance and saturation. They're very similar, but what saturation will do is it will either increase or decrease the saturation of every single pixel in the image more or less equally. Even if a color is saturated and you're moving it to the right, you'll saturate it even more. You'll oversaturate it. Vibrance is a little more nuanced. It will bring colors to saturation, but won't oversaturate the image. Also, vibrance, if you have a person in the photo, like a portrait, it won't make their skin tones look like a sunburn. All right, so it's better for skin tones. So, kind of the rule of thumb, if you have an image and none of the colors are saturated and you don't have a person in the image, move the saturation slider. If I move it all the way to the left, we have a black and white image because it affects every pixel equally. If I go to the right, I'll just increase saturation of all the colors equally. Now, conversely, vibrance for this image will probably do about the same. We don't have any saturated colors. Green is close, but it's really not saturated. Now, if I move it to the right, you can see it's pretty much doing the same thing as saturation. So in this case, I'm just going to move saturation just a little bit to the right. Look at this. There's where we started. There's where we are right now. What a difference. And we only moved a few of the sliders, not even all the sliders, a few of the sliders in the basic tab. So you need to really just process your image very quickly. You want to share it to social media. You want to share it with friends. I got a new camera. Look at these images I took. Wow, look at that. From that to that. Now, if you want to get a little fancy, we could go down here to detail. This is sharpening and noise reduction. And typically, with sharpening and noise reduction, you'd like to zoom in. And just look, first of all, do noise first. Even though sharpening is above it, do the noise reduction first. Because sometimes when you sharpen an image, you're sharpening the noise, and it's more difficult to get rid of. So zoom in. I just see a tiny bit of noise. So luminance, that's usually luminance noise. It's like film grain. Color noise, on the other hand, is little dots, usually red, blue, and green dots. Very tiny dots. I don't see any color noise at all. But if I bring like noise reduction slider, luminance slider to the right to 15, it's all gone. Then I could go to sharpening, and I could sharpen the image, move it to the right. And what you just want to be careful is that you don't over sharpen it. And sometimes it's good to be zoomed in, look at something with detail like the grass or the hay bales, bring sharpening to the right, then zoom out and just look at the overall image. Another thing I recommend you do is that you walk away for a while, because sometimes our eyes get fatigued looking at the screen of our computer, and we tend to over sharpen it because we're kind of fatigued. Just walk away, let your eyes rest for 15 minutes, half hour, come back and look at the image. Right away you'll know it's over sharpened if it is, and then you could back it off. And that's it, you're done. That is the easiest way to make your images pop very quickly. Make them really look good fast. Now again, description below this video, check it out. I got hundreds of videos on Lightroom, and I have beginning to end tutorials on Lightroom that will teach you everything there is about it. I also have presets for Lightroom. If you don't own Lightroom already, I am an affiliate for Adobe, and there'll be a link there too, so you could subscribe to Creative Cloud. Check it out. I just want to thank everyone that watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.